Okay, this is Mackenzie Michael's presentation of the ABCs of Ancient Egypt. Okay, today we're going to be talking about Ancient Egypt. Some of you may have some knowledge about Ancient Egypt. You may have heard some different things, but today we will hopefully be covering some things that you haven't heard about and learning some new terms and phrases that were used in ancient Egyptian language. Okay, so A is for amulet. Amulets were good luck charms worn by the ancient Egyptian people. They were, just like we have good luck charms today, so did the ancient Egyptians. These good luck charms were not only worn by the people in everyday life, but they were also worn by the mummies and were very important for good luck in the afterlife. So if we look at the picture below, we can see that there are many different colors in amulets, and there's different shapes and sizes. And also, if you look closely, you can see that there are different designs on some of the amulets, and each design was considered to bring a different kind of good luck. So just as some people have good luck charms for certain things, so did the ancient Egyptian people. Okay, so the next letter is B. So B is for Book of the Dead. And it was the book that gave the mummies spells to help reach the afterlife. This was a very important book for the Egyptians because not only did it give them information about how to prepare a mummy, it also gave the mummy instructions for the afterlife. If you look at the picture below, you can see that there are pictures and then there's some writing, which we'll talk about later. But it is written on a kind of paper called papyrus. It's Egyptian paper, and it was made of plants that were dried and then flattened into what we now know as paper. So, as I said, this is very important to the Egyptian people, and it was put in, the Book of the Dead was also put into the coffin with the mummy so that the mummy would have instructions in the afterlife. Okay, so C is for cartonnage. We've all seen the mummies and how they look, but cartonnage is actually the hardened fabric used to cover the mummy. So the layers were hardened using kind of like a glue. It's known as stucco or plaster, and these glues would help make the fabric hard so that the mummy would be stiff and have a shape. And once the layers were hardened, then they could be painted with different colors and symbols. So E is for embalming. The steps that were taken to preserve a mummy are the steps of embalming. Embalming was very important to the Egyptian people. Not only was it the actual preparation of the body, so they would clean it and then they would begin to wrap it with the fabric, but it was also very sacred to the people, and they thought it was very important, kind of emotional. It was an emotional and just very personal part of the mummification process. Okay, so hieroglyphics are the written language of the ancient Egyptians. If we look at the bottom here, we can see some examples of hieroglyphics. They are picture-like, and as you can see in this picture, they're actually added different colors to their hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics are considered a pictorial writing. If you think about it, they look like pictures, so they call it pictorial writing. And each word sometimes had a picture associated with it. They also had different letters to spell things out, but it was said that at any time there are about 700 hieroglyphics. That's a lot of hieroglyphics. And you think about the English language and how many letters we have in our language. Think about having to learn 700 different pictures to write with. Okay, so I is for Ibu. This is the place where the person was taken when they died. So in order to get ready to make the mummy, they had to take it to the Ibu. And this was a place where they cleaned and washed the body, not only physically on the outside, like they would clean the skin and get it ready, but they also thought it was very spiritual and very important. So as I said, the body would be cleaned, and then they would start embalming. And we talked about embalming earlier. That was the laying of the fabric over the mummy. And just a little bit of history. When you think about it, it was a structure, it was a place, but the Ibu was actually usually a tent that was located outside of the city. Okay, M is for mourners. when you went to an Egyptian funeral, there would be people that would cry and mourn for the dead. So just like when we go to a funeral today, there are people cry and mourn. But in Egyptian times, they actually had specific people that were supposed to cry and mourn for the dead. And if you were a king or a rich person, sometimes they would hire these people because it was considered very respectful to have these kind of people at your funeral. People that also accompanied the mourners were people like dancers, musicians, and priests. Okay, P is for pyramid, and these were the tombs of the great kings and queens. If we look at the bottom, I'm sure you all have seen pictures of pyramids. This is just one example of a pyramid, and in the Egyptian language, the word for pyramid was actually mer. And these were very important structures to the Egyptian people. They took a very long time to build and a very large number of workers to put together. There was lots of stones and a long process to make these pyramids. And not all pyramids look like the ones pictured. Some of them are much smaller, but they've discovered over 100 pyramids, varying in different sizes, but they're still considered pyramids. Okay, so S is for sarcophagus, and this is actually the hard coffin which the mummy was buried in. If we look at the picture at the bottom, you can see, I'm sure you've all seen pictures of the outer part of the mummy, but this is what they were put into. And these could be made out of different materials. If you were a king, your sarcophagus would probably be made out of gold or a metal, but this one here is made out of wood, and this was a very important part of the mummy, the outer hard surface of the mummy. And as you can see, this one is painted and decorated, and at different times in ancient Egyptian history, these sarcophaguses were different colors, different designs, and things like that. Okay, so T is for tombs, and this is generally just the burial places of Egyptians. And the word tomb can be describing many different kinds of burial places. As we talked about earlier, we talked about the pyramids. That was the tomb of the king. But not all tombs are pyramids. For people that were not royalty, they were usually buried in the sides of hills or mountains, as we can see in this picture here. And there was an entrance that went into the hill. And these tombs could have one room, some hallways, or many rooms, depending on how rich the person was. And they had different rooms because the tomb was considered the place that the mummy would spend the afterlife. So they wanted to have a good home for the afterlife, so they would have different rooms. Okay, U is for Ushdabi, and these are small figures that were placed in the tomb of the mummies. When you think about it, we weren't really, today in American culture and what we think about now when burying people, we didn't really bury people with things. You put them in a coffin and that's it. But as we've been talking about, ancient Egyptians buried their mummies with lots of different things, and the Ushtabi are one of the things that they buried them with. These are considered to be servants for the afterlife and were very important. And like many of the other things we've been talking about, these can be made out of different materials, but the Ushtabi were very common in tombs, and as people have discovered different pyramids and different tombs, they are among the most commonly found artifacts for ancient Egypt. And the last term we're going to talk about is W, the weight of the heart, the weighing, of the heart. And this is the ceremony where the mummy was judged for his or her life. This is a very important part of the afterlife. It's crucial to the mummy getting into the afterlife. And there's a lot of different pictures and hieroglyphics describing this ceremony, but basically the mummy would have to stand before a god, Orisis, and face judgment. And only the mummies whose souls were lighter than the feather of truth. The feather of truth was something that was very important in ancient Egyptian history. Only if it was lighter than that feather could the mummy enter into the next life. So today we talked a lot about terms of ancient Egypt, and as you can tell, almost all of them have something to do with mummies and the afterlife. So this is very important to ancient Egyptians, and it's something that was very sacred and just very high value. We can see they focused on how rituals were performed, with things like the Book of the Dead telling them exactly how to make the mummy. We learn about why they thought they were sacred, purifying and cleansing, and then we can also talk about the importance of being prepared for the afterlife. They put a lot of time and energy into preparing a mummy, and then the mummy also had to do a lot to get into the afterlife. So a lot of it focuses on mummies and the dead.